Welcome to the BPM 360 podcast. I'm Russell.
And I'm Caspar. And together we will help you navigate the treacherous waters of the BPM adoption journey. I hope you enjoy the podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the BPM 360 podcast. I'm Caspar, your host, and with me is, as usual, my trusted friend and co-host, Russell. Russell, how are you, my friend?
I'm fine. Actually, I'm still on holiday, as you may notice, with my background filming.
I do notice.
Yes, and the weather here is still awesome, so I'm not looking forward to getting back to the German autumn weather. But who knows? Who knows? Maybe, climate change, maybe something will turn out different this year.
Yeah. I had to fly back last night from Munich to Düsseldorf, and that was one of the most bumpiest flights I've ever had. The weather in Germany certainly is not recommendable. Stay as long as you want where you are right now. I know that you have to get back, but that's not why we're here. So I'm happy that you can join from your location, but we also have a guest today, Russell.
Yes, that's fantastic, and especially after we've covered the French weather and the German weather and the Dutch weather. Maybe we can have an insight into the weather in UK.
Yeah, let's do that. So let me welcome to the episode Liam O'Neill. Liam, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and to get to speak to you about the British weather.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can do that as well. But first and foremost, of course, we're very honored to have you on the show. The first thing we would like to do is to make sure that the listeners know who you are. So could you give us a little bit of a rundown on who Liam O'Neill is, what you do, and how did you end up in process management?
Absolutely. So, as Caspar said, my name's Liam O'Neill. I run a consultancy called BPM-D. We specialise in helping companies establish effective process management disciplines, effective teams that deliver good results. How I came into the process space, I'd love to say it was planned, it was intentional, it was always a passion, but it was a little bit of an accidental tumble into a process. So, yeah, I was just coming out of university and I was just looking across 1,000,001 different things and I had no idea what I wanted to do. L'Oreal was one of my options, Maersk as a supply chain manager, a whole host of other ones. My dad tried to get me working at the local Heinz baked bean factory.
And now for something completely different.
But I just wanted to work for a startup. BPM-D it was 3 people in an attic back then. And that seemed right up my alley. And it just happened to be in that process management space. And I'm going on for just a little over 10 years now with BPM-D, being in the process space, and never once thought about getting out, to be honest.
Wow. That means when you started, it was the people like Peter Franz and I think it was Kirchmer, I hope I pronounced that right, that were actually founded it, right?
Yeah.
So you're one of the first employees.
Yeah, I am formal employee number 2.
Oh.
Wow. Well, there you go. I knew we had a special guest, Russell.
Yes. And it just goes to show the process management sticks.
I just wanted to say, you just like Alice, you fell down the rabbit hole like us, and you've never found the.
Exactly. So that's it. That's it. Everybody's still on the way, thinking, so have I covered everything here that I can move on? And then you find another topic to dig down into, or a different customer or a different challenge. So it seems to be like a lot of people trip in, but not so many people trip out.
Yeah. We're not going to go as far as to call it Hotel California. Shall we agree on that?
But
I think there's life after BPM, but.
Well, there certainly is a life next to BPM and after BPM. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, for sure. So help us out. How does your life outside of BPM? Oh, sorry, Russell, go ahead.
No, it's fine. We still have. Please, Caspar, jump in.
Yeah, sure. So, Liam, help us out a little bit. How does your life look like when you're not in BPM? We always like to know that as well.
I've got 2 young children, and I used to have hobbies.
Now you have children.
So most of my time is spent looking at Pokemon cards and reading Pokemon stories at them.
Okay.
But when I do manage to escape, I sometimes play touch rugby with a few of the lads I know around London. I've recently got back into the gym after having a few years off and in every moment just trying to survive a 1 and a 2-year-old. I'm now into a space where you have just enough time to go to the gym and not get overridden.
Yeah. I mean, I did the same thing, but let's not get into that much. Having said that, I mean, this is a BPM podcast, so let's see if we can have some insights here. What I'm particularly interested in to get this started is you've been involved in many different implementations around process management, regardless of the tool that companies use. We're tool agnostic in this podcast. What would you say is one of the most frequently occurring pitfall that companies seem to run into time and time again with BPM?
Definitely. I usually see 3 things go wrong with process implementations. I've worked with over 70 companies now to help build out high performance process practices. And even just earlier this week, I was speaking with one that had a legacy BPM team. They had one of the old tools, one of the ones that was a very big player a few years ago and is on the downswing now. And one of the big perceptions in a business is that it's by architects and for architects. Process in the 2010s, in the 2000s was difficult to get into. Some of those tools were hard to use. And what you ended up with was these business architects, process managers, creating complex models, using all the different odds and ends of BPMN to create something that they understood and adhered to every single one of the rules and specifications. But the rest of the business wasn't engaging with it. The rest of the business wasn't getting value out of it. If you went to head of operations, head of supply chain, and said, look, there's this process management team, a process management tool, what's in it for you? They wouldn't have an answer. And that's the big falling down point for historic BPM, is that there wasn't a clear line as to what's in it for the rest of the business. And that's something you've really got to challenge to get good, effective engagement in process. People have got to see themselves in it. It's got to make their lives better.
Cool. That sounds quite recognizable, to be very honest. And I think that second thing, or maybe it's the first thing, but let's see, the overly complex models is something that I encounter a lot. I usually start by saying to my clients, listen, when you model, when you document, you do it for 2 purposes. You do it for a creation and maintenance purpose. You need to be able to create those models, and you need to be able to consume them for purpose. And if you make really complex models that are understandable only if you have a master's degree in enterprise architecture, you're ignoring the consumption perspective. But that is by far the biggest group of users you probably will have in your platform. So I see that go wrong very often, to be honest.
Yeah, and I do like the way you were saying the legacy BPM team. It sounds like an old relic that you kind of like said, oh my God, you've opened up a cupboard and you find the legacy BPM team still there. Said, are you still creating models? Yes, I still haven't finished the most complex model there. So I like that expression. that really hits it. I mean, that's definitely fits very much with what we account to as well. That's why I think we always try to say, okay, so in German, the process management teams that say that their purpose of existence is process management, I say, oh, we have a problem. Yeah, so it's not in itself, and as soon as you say, okay, I want to achieve process excellence, you said, okay, then who is the people you need to talk to say what define excellence, define ownership, and then they have to get out of their cabinet and talk to the business and really say what's in it for you. How can I help you? Again, process excellence on your, let's say, operative processes, and not, let's have the excellence in process management processes. That's not going to be of any help to the bottom line of the company. What do you think the reason is that there's still some, or that even they occurred so frequently, these legacy like BPM departments? Is it a bit of my take is a lot of initiatives were driven more from a compliance documentation ISO perspective, like in Germany, and it was like quality management and compliance that was then said, okay, do it. We need to do it. Don't get us too much involved. Just take care of this, and not this real collaboration. What is your view on what the actual why are there so many BPM legacy companies around?
Yeah, you broke up a little bit then, but
Yeah.
the question I think was, when you've got process and it's sitting in these quality teams and it's serving compliance purposes, how do you break out of that box and get more of a business to engage with it? How do you get more people to see it as something that can drive positive change as opposed to just being an audit tick box? Was that the question direction?
Yeah. That's fine.
Yeah, perfect.
Very. Yeah, go ahead, Liam.
Yeah, see, so a lot of those are legacy BPM teams, that is the purpose, right? It is to tick the audit box to say we are fully documented, we're fully compliant. Whether or not those processes actually reflect the way the business works. And I've seen this across so many of the organizations I've worked with where there's this real fear about moving from this complex monolith they have, but they know gets them past the ISO auditors. They know ticks that compliance box. How to get them out of that space into a space where they have process models and process mining platforms that actually support the initiatives the business needs to do, as well as audit and compliance. Whenever we look at modernizing a BPM team, one of the key things, one of those key initial steps is making sure that you continue to tick that compliance box. It is important. You can't just move away from that. So there's a migration piece. Ideally, what you really want to do, though, is enrich those models as you bring them back across. Get a really clear ownership structure. Who's the process owner, your process champions and sponsors at a global and local level? Who's going to take accountability for that model, not only being accurate, but that process being effective? Bring that into the new world. And then for the quality team, there's usually one other big pain point, which is when they do these big audits, there'll be lots of audit actions, recommendations, things that they need to change, and they need to prove the moving those actions forward. So rather than just ticking a box that everything's documented, why not make your new repository a way of tracking those actions? Bring in those actions from those ISO audit reports, tag them to your processes, create evidence there in your process repository as to how you're making a move to improve and address some of those problems, and make sure your quality stakeholders are happy. But then reuse those assets to support those other use cases, those other services you're going to offer out of your BPM team, but be really specific with them. You can't just say, we're going to use these and it'll make everything better. We'll do improvement with the process models. What is that specific? So what's the BPM team do? If you've got a separate process mining team who doesn't sit in the BPM team, what's their role? Then how does that dovetail with the other change makers in the organization? So you've got quality engaged in making sure you've got a repository that supports compliance. But when you engage those other change makers, your change managers, your PMO, to make sure that those improvement programs run across BPM into the other areas and actually deliver something that really moves the business forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think here you talk about the use cases. Yeah, of course, quality management and compliance were the first two real use cases, I would say. And usually, so I would call that process excellence was one of the first use cases, which was really close to quality management, I would say. Compliance is the second one. The one that we have now, I would say, is much more around the transformation and change use case, where we do now have the availability of the mining much more commonly than we had. I mean, mining's been there for 20 years, but it really started picking up, let's say 2014, 2015, when it became much more mature than it was back in 2001. Where do you see this going? We came from a place where we had basically just modeling. We actually came from a place where the process model was the deliverable, which was horrible if you think about it. We went to a place where the model is the means to an end. Then we added in things like, automation somewhere, starting automating processes that weren't optimized yet. So that just resulted into crap quicker and cheaper. We've added mining. I see orchestration on the horizon as well. Where do you think this is going? Let's take a little bit of a peek into the future of what Liam thinks about this.
Yeah, definitely. So I was heavily into the process modeling space and a little bit, I'd say, slow almost on the pickup of mining, but really big adopter of it now. The difference between what you can do from just talking to people to looking at the data behind is massive. But the evolution isn't going to stop with just RPA was never the end game. And when you got into it, the lack of a brain behind some of those decisions, it became apparent what some of the limitations were, and it ended up being almost a massive risk for a lot of organizations that built a massive dependency on some of those unintelligent bots. I like that you brought up orchestration. There's a lot of vendors in that hyper automation space. There's a million and one tools that can do workflow automation, RPA, low, no code, all of that. But the real challenge isn't being able to build a bot, being able to embed AI. It's about being able to look across your end-to-end business and being able to orchestrate all those different pieces, people, systems, automations working together seamlessly. Orchestration is a massive piece. And I think where we go from orchestration is almost into that UI space, where you have a unified UI, rather than having multiple different systems. You have a single UI, a little bit more intelligence sat behind it with the orchestration layer sitting underneath it. So you don't need to go into SAP, Salesforce, ServiceNow differently. Instead, you have a single UI interface for the user, massive automation behind it, back end. And then the digital twin is overseeing the orchestration layer, overseeing performance. So the front-end users have an easy way of accessing it in almost natural language. Digital twin performance oversight has orchestration looking at business performance. And then on the technical side, there's obviously more and more natural language development happening with tools like Lovable that are not enterprise ready yet, but the speed at pace of change there is massive. So I think you end up with those three areas where the technical barriers are broken down. End users got a nice interface, no system specificity. Digital twins got a really good view of the business, almost real-time insight into what's working and what's not. And the actual development piece is breaking down those technical barriers more and more closely aligned with natural language development.
So the interesting thing here, and I agree with what you're saying, is that if I look at as the Germans say it so nicely, in großen Ganzen, so the big picture of what organizations have to deal with, is that you have a repository, you have a source of this is my. I wouldn't go as far as to call it your digital twin, but that's what it boils down to. I have a digital twin of my organization, which basically describes this is how we expect everybody to work together. This is how everything aligns. That used to be, if I look at let's say the previous batch of BPM tools, they try to be closed off. The data is in, it's very difficult to get the data out. I think we see a much more openness right now in the market where we say, well, the BPM tool itself is just a container for the data, but if you want to do something valuable with it, you need to get it out. Tools like orchestration engines, the mining side, the automation side, and adoption tools like WalkMe, another one of those need to tap into that information. But that would mean, if we look at what that would require, is that you have a much more standardized methodology on how to document the process, so that all of these tools can access that information much easier. What do you think about that? And by the way, before you answer, we haven't lost Russell, but he's in such a remote area in Europe somewhere that his video feed can't be done. So we still have him on audio.
Yes, I hope you can still hear me.
It's really interesting you bring this up, because I was having this conversation actually just yesterday.
There you go. We're very current.
And very specific for an organization, but it was zeroing in on service execution. ServiceNow has got some really interesting workflow capability in it now. It's got these playbooks, which are almost like workflows, along with integration of where it can start to touch other systems. You can automate the way you do service execution, get into SAP to get the order, go through ServiceNow to manage a ticket, and manage those handoff points between customers, vendor, third parties, etc. What you can't do effectively is be able to look across that end-to-end picture and see where there's points that are causing that pain. Where is it that's getting caught? Where is it breaking down? On an individual ticket basis, but more so at an aggregated basis. When you're looking at hundreds of thousands of millions of orders, that's when purely looking at workflow, purely looking at how a single case is going through, isn't going to tell you the full picture. So there is this massive space for execution layer, and that's evolving really quickly. But there does need to be orchestration, but more so oversight. You have to be able to very quickly understand where the business is breaking, where those pain points are, because you can't just wing it in a workshop. You can't just pull 5 people together and say, right, tell me what your problems are. What's not quite working for you? You need to say, there's a million cases coming through. There's no way Margaret sitting in finance in London is going to know the picture globally. We need to look at that bigger picture. And the only way you can get to that is by looking at the data and looking end to end, not just within a system, but across your whole process.
But so that raises another interesting point, Liam. I mean, completely agree. If you want to have insights, if you want to be able to manage something, you need to be able to measure it. We're going to go very quickly back to what used to be called business intelligence, BI, which typically looked on spot situations, and they never looked at the process, which was why mining basically killed that industry. Mining also doesn't cover everything, at least not yet, because not everything is actually captured in a system by a timestamp, which is one of the crucial things you need to be able to do mining. I mean, what would your ideas, if we look 5 years into the future, how would an organization be able to say, I do now have enough insights on a more global level to identify this is the state of my organization without having to do 75 different dashboards? How do we get that information? Where is it coming from, in your opinion?
That's a really interesting, this is something I learned for consulting and shaping useful projects, but it's something I've been using more and more with BPM teams and trying to get them to be more objective driven. So when you're shaping up a program, a piece of work, the tendency is to go and say, what are we going to do? What's deliverable? What's the work? What's the approach? And not spend enough time thinking about what the objective is, how it affects the business, how it affects the bottom line. Same thing with process mining. There's so much data in there. You might not have every single timestamp, everything you want, but there's a wealth of data in there. But you shouldn't be asking yourself, what is there? What can I work with? It needs to be, what are the specific objectives for this process that dictate success? What are my success metrics? Both at kind of the sponsor level over across an entire end-to-end, and at a more compartmentalized level, level 3 is what are the real business objectives? How can I hold people to account for those? So there's this shift from what can I look at to what is actually important for the business. Let's say you're looking at service execution, the example I was touching on yesterday. You can talk about having a good process, good visibility, having good cycle time, all these good little mini indicators, right? What are the 2 or 3 main objectives? The main one is, how efficient are we in terms of the third-party costs, in terms of the processing costs, in terms of the manual costs? Is that as efficient as it needs to be? Can we bring down some of those costs? What's the handling time, the actual efforts? And then another massive one is, how happy are the customers? Are they dissatisfied? Do we have a really high churn rate? Can we improve this process, improve the churn rate? If we improve it 1% and you're making 10 million through that process, that's a really significant impact on the bottom line. But what are the specific business objectives, and focusing in on those? You shouldn't have a million dashboards, but you should have, for a sponsor, for the oversight of the end-to-end, what are the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 measures that are really important to dictate business success?
Yeah, because the conversation I'm having quite often, and certainly we're having that in the company I work for, is what they sometimes call the control tower concept, where you basically have like a, just give me a second. All right, good. There's a.
So sorry, someone sorry about that.
No worries.
Phone disconnected for a second.
This is what happens when you do live BPM podcast episodes. Don't worry about it. Today's episode is challenging also with Russell's, but we're going to muddle through, so no worries at all. And so the question I was trying to get to is, we very often talk about those control tower concepts where you say, well, I have like a war room with all kinds of screens, and they just show me this is where state of the union for my company, actually. And it looks really good, and you can prompt it in the AI. It will give you fantastic pictures on how it should look like. In reality, it's very difficult. And one of the reasons I come across, and I would like to have your opinion on that, is basically garbage in, garbage out. I mean, the state of the data quality that most companies operate on, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, is dramatic. And it's not in a positive way dramatic. Do you come across those things as in your practice?
Definitely. You'll know whenever you do a process mining project, about a third of the improvements are the data could be a bit better here.
Yeah.
Russell chimes in now. Go on, Russell, give us
Yeah,
your
and
opinion.
actually, but just wanted to also dig into that. So yes, we have the data challenge as well, but I did very much like about the orchestration, Liam, that you were talking about, the digital twin of the end-to-end view. So I think there's also a challenge in getting the whole organization to chime into this. This is our common understanding of the objectives, the purpose, and what we want to achieve in our processes across the business functions. And then based on that, then to dig into the orchestration. So I think a lot of the challenges we have is first transforming the company to have a common understanding on their objectives are impacted, or the processes impact the objectives, agree upon common objectives, and then start working on this orchestration layer. I think, Caspar, what you're thinking about is like the end game, having good data based on an agreed digital twin and end-to-end, let's say, model on this is how we want to work, and then getting some, let's say a tool, or getting the tools in to really have a real-time orchestration of what's happening. And so I think we have a couple of building sites we have to work on to get there. But I think it is more and more a feeling there that it's manageable. I think before, ideas like this were they put aside. So again, Liam, I really totally agree that there's so many new capabilities out there, especially with the large language models and AI tools that go far beyond what was achieved in the first stages with the RPA. Yeah, because now there is more a connect between what you're actually having a bot do and a deeper understanding on what he is actually interacting. It's not like a black box somebody is programmed and is doing some magic, and then you don't really know if it's doing it good or bad. So here, I think this is the big topic for the next couple of years, where customers can re-evolve in their maturity.
Definitely. I think one of the big drivers, though, has to be effective of the major changes. Across an end-to-end, there's so many different objectives, but process ownership or being a process lead, whatever you want to call it, but that next click down, not an order to cash process owner, but for specific process, manage inbound invoices. You need ownership at that level. You need to be clear on what the objectives are for that process. And someone needs to be held to account for that process being effective and trending in the right direction. And I just think process ownership is a fantastic tool. If you can define your taxonomy, get to level 3 processes and put someone specific on every single one, that means you have someone who is motivated to make them better. Go one step further. With a shipping client, we even started to look at embedding those KPIs into those people's job profiles. So they were really held to account. Come performance management, come bonus time, that's embedded. They have to be making progress and making that way of working better. So it's not just a case of let's update a model, let's tick a box on the dashboard. It's crap, I need to change something if I want to get my bonus at the end of the year.
But
yeah,
just to chime in here a little bit.
Caspar, please.
Just allow me, Russell, for a second. I'm completely on board on the process ownership and the governance stuff. I recommend that all the time. The reality I also see from time to time, ownership is very often assigned to somebody as an additional responsibility, as a side job, and not as his main activity. And for some cases that is fine, but for certain very high frequency processes that you really need to manage closely, it almost becomes a full-time job. And the question always is, Are you paying lip service to the concept of process management as an organization, or are you actually on board with it and embracing it completely? Do you encounter that kind of differences, Liam, in your practice as well?
Definitely, definitely. I think one of the biggest challenges there is if you've got a smaller organization, single site or handful of sites, have that single process owner. When you start to have multiple sites and it's more federated, you have 9, 10, 20 sites, all doing the same sort of thing, all with the same person filling the same sort of role. Do you then establish a global process owner? Do you have a group of process owners with one which is lead amongst equals? What is that? And when you get into that model where it is much more federated, if you do have, chief amongst equals, that person's got a lot more associated responsibilities with that role about managing variation, managing the overall process, being involved in the management of change requests. So it can gear up, definitely.
Okay.
I do find a bit of a challenge when you have process owners sitting as an entirely discrete role in an organization, and it's at quite an abstract level. So when you have order to cash process owners who sit globally, I understand it in the context of an ERP program. You want someone to be that management of change mechanism as you're going through the ERP design. But when it gets to BAU, I tend to find there can be that degree of separation from a business that means that role isn't as effective as it can be when it is a bit more aligned with the business.
So what would your recommendation be? I 100% agree that you always finish up, the bigger the organization and the bigger the transformation initiatives are. You just mentioned it, classical order to cash with an ERP implementation. You do need a full-time job, at least for one person, to actually take care of this from an ownership perspective, designing and transforming the company. The risk is becoming decoupled with this young from the actual operations. What are your thoughts on how you could still manage this? Or what are the mechanisms or, let's say, approach they keep that connect? Do you have any ideas or experience how you've managed this?
Definitely. So I think during the course of an ERP program, while it's still, you're in the midst of a lot of moving pieces, especially for a larger organization, it can make sense to have that end-to-end. It's a product owner role, really, as opposed to a process owner. It's very system specific, and it can make sense. But when you move into that, you move past that, I think there's 4 really important roles to embed in the business, i.e. not in the BPM team, but in the functions. And that is your process sponsor at a head of function level. So when you can set direction, all the standard things a head of function would do. But then the only other piece is you want that person assigning process ownership, primary process ownership into the business. You want process owners 1 or 2 levels down from head of function typically. And obviously it depends on the size of the organization, how much you decompose. But you want process owners in the business who are accountable for how a process is performing and can be held to account for that. I do like that first amongst equals model, but you do need to make sure that if someone is in that role, they're given the appropriate time to be able to dedicate to that management of change for when requests do come through. Essentially sitting there, being responsible for how they deviate from a global process and performance in their region. And I'm a big advocate of process champion roles. We identify those people in the organization who have shown real propensity, real engagement in process, and are generally a bit more junior, but can start to support some of those initiatives, those change programs, kind of shape them as those future process owners who can transition into those roles in a few years' time. I think what's really key is for all 3 levels, so sponsor, owner, and the more junior engagement level, you're really clear on what's in it for them. Sponsor, it should be straightforward. The typical performance of a function, those macro level enterprise KPIs being held to account for. Process owners, it's carrot and stick, right? Stick is obviously those KPIs that are held to account for, but it needs to be a carrot. So how are you rewarding them? How are you celebrating the good work that they do commit there? There's almost this massive piece to BPM, which is marketing, people management, which I find is so often forgotten about. Really shouting loud about. When at the junior level, the motivations are so different. It's about career progression. It's a little bit more centric on the individual, and a little bit more centric on fun. One of the things I'm about to start trialing is as I mentioned before, my son's obsessed with Pokemon at the moment, so I'm trialing getting gym badges. When you beat a badge in Pokemon, you get a gym badge. Getting a gym badge for BPM. Whenever you, as someone in that engagement group, whenever you want the new leaders, you get a new BPM badge.
Yeah, some gamification there.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's the word I was going for, Russell. You just beat me to it, but gamification really works. I've never seen it really in a BPM platform. I see it on community sites. I actually implemented gamification in my DSM years for a cultural change based on the usage of Yammer and SharePoint and these kind of things, and how well do people share. I really think that if you would develop a BPM tool from scratch, then gamification really needs to be in there because it drives adoption. All right, there's one topic that I would like to cover before we already end up around the end of the hour. So BPM-D, Liam, is active in multiple regions, right? I mean, you're UK based, but you do also work outside of the UK. What do you see differences in how countries or regions approach the topic of BPM? Is there a difference between how they do it in the UK versus how they do it in Benelux or in the Nordics? If you have any exposure,
massive difference. So
please do tell.
That sounds good. Give us more.
Yeah. I think that's my answer. No, majority of our work is actually not in the UK. It is in Netherlands, Denmark, and the Nordics. And especially 2015 to 2018, I'd say, there was quite a lot of hesitancy around BPM in the UK. Some tools, Aris had a decent footprint out of the more enterprise organizations, but smaller companies weren't very much in the space where they wanted to embrace a dedicated BPM tool, dedicated teams and thinking around process. And when you got into the data side of things, process mining, that just wasn't very prevalent in the landscape at all. And almost all of my mining projects from the 2010s on the continent, in the Netherlands and in the Nordics, what tend to find in the Nordics, people were very direct and very results focused.
Yep.
Very straight talking, which once you get used to it, you adapt to it. It's fantastic, much quicker. But because you could talk about the outcomes of doing these process mining projects, as opposed to getting lost in the detail of explaining the change from a legacy way of working, it was a bit quicker to get to that point where they're engaging those programs. And similarly in the Nordics, I think people are a bit more open to trying new things, innovations. The UK is coming around, especially when you look at different sectors, some more tech-enabled sectors, some that are in the more high-paced industries tend to move a little bit quicker than some of those legacy organizations. But I'd say as a rule of thumb, the Netherlands and the Nordics, from what I've seen, are a bit quick to embrace new technology. Where we're at right now with BPM is the UK is very much opening up to that. Increasingly, people are seeing the value in it.
Yeah.
Is there something?
No, go ahead.
Was there a different, let's say, topic or methodology around in UK that was taking up this space, or was it more like people were in UK more Lean Six Sigma oriented, or did they take a different direction, or were they more strategic on a balanced scorecard? Was there something where process management is now displacing a certain methodology, or is it just something that was just not on their mind and they went about it in a complete different fashion, less unstructured but more hands-on? What would your take be on the difference on a UK market? What were they doing to optimize their processes?
Yeah, one of the things you see in a lot of British companies is have these bigger continuous improvement Lean Six Sigma teams. I obviously wasn't around at the dawn of Lean Six, but it seems to have been pretty well adopted. And there's a lot of QMS tools as well in the UK, management tools where you've got reams and reams of documentation. So maybe I'm speculating before I got into the market. Maybe they were slower on the uptake, but they were definitely occupying a big space.
Yeah, okay.
There's a lot of nuance there, right? Going from process management, process intelligence, into that process improvement pure play. What is the difference in the value proposition? Trying to convince someone who's done BMAC and fishbone diagrams on a wall, move into a process repository, move into process intelligence. There's a big change element in their way of operating that perhaps they weren't quite ready for. But increasingly the market's really coming around to that, which is obviously fantastic too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's like the BPM legacy organizations. We see it in around Germany a lot, that you have these Lean Six Sigma and quality management initiatives. But they allocate the process management space topic. It's like assigned to them. But sometimes they haven't progressed the methodology to think more, as you said, about talking about end-to-end and orchestration. They're lagging behind, and it needs a bit of a disruption to get them to move in direction of thinking bigger, thinking more end-to-end, thinking more like process management orchestration, rather than single process optimization bit by bit. And so I think we have a similar situation in Germany in certain companies and industries, and it's just a matter of when does this trend kind of like impact or disrupt these old more legacy process organizations. Yeah.
Definitely. I was actually speaking to a defense company not long ago. It was about this. It was about business modernization. The improvement leader had been tasked with modernizing the business and told, why don't you look at quality management systems? I don't know how, but he stumbled on some of my LinkedIn videos and we started having a conversation. Look, quality management systems, great for ticking that compliance box, great for really understanding what you're doing, but they're not going to move you forward. They're not going to modernize you. That's not the tool. It's not the skill set for that. And
I agree.
You have to move into that process intelligence, that process change space to design that target way of working, and then have that whole execution layer to be able to deliver it.
Yeah, absolutely true. And I think that's a great segue into the last thing, which is me wrapping up this episode. We got to that point where we need to think about our audience as well. There's just one last thing, I think, Liam. I just want to ask you, what do you think? And I love this from another podcast who also look into this. What do you think at this point in time is the biggest buzzword that goes around in BPM that we need to take seriously?
Biggest buzzword? Oof.
Yeah. Hate to put you on the spot, but
buzzword that I think has legs, or buzzword that I think is pure buzz?
Yeah.
I would say, really put me on the spot there.
Yeah. I mean, this is fun, but it's also a bit challenging when you go into a podcast.
Yeah, I think digital twin is. I've used it myself. I'm guilty of it, but it's not specific enough. It means a lot of things to a lot of different people. With process, the best way is to talk specifics. What are you going to do? What's going to change? Digital twin just makes it more complex, less clear on what you're getting out of it. So if I was going to go buzzword, I think I'd go digital twin.
Good one. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
But would you say digital twin as a concept, that's without us defining in detail what you understand of it, is it something that's underrated? Is it something that should be defined, it should be driven forward? Or is it a buzzword where you say it should be dropped? Does it have potential? Or is it something where it says it's just another buzzword, let's rather drop it?
I think it needs to be further clarified. So the B-22 bomber, this US bomber plane, they built a digital twin of that, which was basically CAD design, but in a ton of detail. That is a digital twin, but also having a view of your organization and the way it works is digital twin. They're so different, and they're both technically digital twins.
Yeah.
Go next click down. And both have validity, but we need to be more specific.
That's why very often you see the term DTO, so digital twin of an organization, which makes it, of course, a little bit more specific. But yeah, I agree that certainly in the high tech industry and in the defense industry, a digital twin is already common knowledge and common good for a while. But anyway, I mean,
engineering and simulation. Yeah, so the thing is, I also encountered digital twins more in engineering and environments where they were trying to simulate at best possible, all the things could go wrong before they actually start building machines or ports or something really, really big and expensive. So I do like the basic idea here. So I think it is something in the context of organizations. It would require some more specifying, but it definitely is a good concept because it expands the space of just talking about a process repository. So that's something where, because I think there is more to the whole space of understanding an organization end to end than typically is, well, that people perceive is covered in the process repository, and that's something for the end to end and orchestration level and the data aspects of process mining. I think the process mining repository idea has to evolve a bit. Maybe we could take up some later episode what that could look like in specific.
Yeah, that sounds like a plan. Having said that, and having said all of that, I think it was a really interesting episode where we overcame some technical audio and visual challenges. Nevertheless, I think we managed to put together quite a good listening for our audience. So, Liam, I would love to say thank you very much for showing up in our podcast and being cross-examined by Russell and myself. Just kidding. Well, I think you had a great contribution to the lineup of our episodes. So, thank you very much for that. I hope you enjoyed it too, by the way.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure to really get into it on process.
Very good. And for the listeners, I would say thank you very much for sticking up while we try to navigate all the technicalities. We hope to see you again next time. And until that time, I say take care and thank you for listening.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot, Liam.